Hi, this is Valdo Villegas, and we're continuing the pruning demonstrations for the Sierra Foothills Rose Society. And today we're going to have Sue McGill talk about tools of the trade. Sue is a master rosarian, judge with the American Rose Society. She's been growing roses forever, since she was 12 years old. I'm envious because I grew roses from 1981 or so when I first got my house. So you got me beat.
Well, it was only because my mother was a gardener and we had roses in the backyard.
So take it away, Sue.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is we're talking about tools today, but one of the most important tools before you ever get out to the garden is to make sure you have a tetanus shot and it's up to date. Now more than ever. But you need to do that, especially when you're out this time of year. Okay, I'm going to start with probably gloves, because you need gloves. And there's all kinds of gloves, and there's all kinds of theories about them. This time of year, you might want long gloves that come up. And I have these, and you can see I've used these. You can always tell because I have
you taped them
tape.
up.
Listen, duct tape works in the garden too. I have my show gloves. These are the ones a lot of people like to use. They're goat skin, and they go way up. But for me, they're not pliable enough. So I like to use these. They're a little bit better. And then I use these, which are much easier. And they're called an armadillo, and they go over, and they still protect you. So I can wear just regular goatskin gloves. And again, this is the same thing.
I used to wear those when I used to pick citrus.
Exactly, that's where they came from.
Yes.
But they work, but these are my show ones. These are the ones that I use winter and summer because they work even when you have short gloves on. Okay, so those are gloves. Don't go out in the garden without gloves.
So,
which I do, but
one of the other thing is that we need to dress accordingly.
Exactly.
You know, get dressed with clothes that you don't mind ripping. And then get a couple layers on. Because
Absolutely.
you're going to get poked by the thorns.
You are. So
and
you
then
have to be
also
careful.
You need some head protection.
And if you wear glasses, make sure you wear glasses, and if you need safety glasses, over the top of them so you don't get poked. So that's good to know. I'm just looking. Oh, and also, you might want to get garden shoes. Chances are it's going to be crummy and wet and yucky when you're doing pruning this time of year. Later on in the summer, you might want to wear those too, just because they're easier to put on and off when you go out into the garden. And they protect your feet, because chances are there's going to be thorns and pruning branches that you might step on. So you want to be protected all over. And obviously this is not what I would wear to prune in, but this is not actual pruning day, as you'll see from the garden. Okay, the next important thing are pruners. You want to make sure you get pruners that are bypass. That means they are like scissors. You might have other pruners that you think are fine, but they're awful. Don't use them. They're called anvil, and what they do is chop and shred. You want to use these for other things like cutting drip irrigation. I mean, they can still be used, but not on your roses.
I like to use these ARS pruners because they have rotating handles, and it's a lot easier in your hands.
Well,
especially when you're going to be pruning
a lot
of roses.
Now, my problem with that is I have a small hand, so I have an ARS pruner, but it's a smaller size, and they don't come
Yeah.
in rotating.
This is,
It opens too big.
This is the small size for the ARS pruner.
Yeah, which is still
And
too
then
big for me.
This is the larger hands for, okay?
And these are wonderful. One of my favorite parts is they have this little latch, so you only have to do it one-handed. You can open it, and you can close it without having to use your other hand.
Yeah.
You can still be holding
This one, you go like that, and then you,
up,
and that's the way you,
close it.
yeah.
But there's sometimes your thumb gets tired. Now, there are other pruners that you might have for your miniatures. And these are extra. A lot of the things we show you are going to be extra. Think of them as maybe extra toys that you might have in your tool chest. But what you really need are your tetanus shot, your pruners, and the clothing that you need. These other things might be just extra, but if you don't have too many roses, you don't need all this other stuff. And I use not a holster, but one of these, and you can see it's been through many things of duct tape. And I can keep pruners in there. I often keep a pencil in there. I usually keep my sharpener in there just in case, so I don't have to keep coming back and forth to a table or another structure, which is why you might consider having either a bucket or something else that you can carry some of these extra things with, so it just is easier. You don't have to put them down on the wet ground. You can just put them in the whatever you're going to use to carry. You also, one of my favorite tools year-round is this basket. They make them much larger. This is like a junior size, but it's much easier for me to use, to dump, to just kind of keep around.
Also, it fits around the roses, you know, so you,
Yes, it's easier to get in and out when you have crowded roses. Okay, a couple of other pruning kind of tools. This is one you're probably familiar with. It's huge. I don't use it. When my husband was doing the pruning, he would use it. For me, it's just the handles are too long. What I prefer to use is one that's this size. And it allows me to get in and under and cut wherever I need to. And notice where I'm putting these. I'm putting these in a container that is filled with kitty litter, which sounds crazy, but I think it helps keep the tools from getting rusty and crummy. And it's also handy to have, to just stick them in. You know exactly where they are. You don't have to spend time thinking, where did I put that? If you always put it back where it should belong. This is another tool that I think is easy for me to use. It's a long-handled pruner, but is not that long. And you can reach in, clip, especially with a climber, or if something is back and you don't want to get all snagged, you can use this. And then there is this, which is another kind, I think it was called a giraffe, but it's the same idea. We had them to pick fruit, but it also works for climbers. And it's the same idea, which is not working, but this opens up and then you can hold it and it kind of telescopes. So if you have a really tall rose, it would work. Obviously it doesn't get used too much, but it's available. Okay, that kind of takes care of some of the pruners that I use. And I would say if you are only going to get two, get a good pair of pruners, bypass pruners, and a lopper. And depending how dainty you are, you might want a short one, or if you're somewhat huskier, you might want a big one. But if you don't have a lot of roses, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can get by with just a set of good bypass pruners. If you only have a few roses, you can get a less expensive and fancier. These were Martha Stewart years ago, and I don't really use them, but I thought they were kind of pretty. So it's up to you and how much you want to spend on your hobby. Because remember, the whole point of this is finding joy out in your garden. During these times of these horrid times that we're living in, you want your garden to be a silver lining for your life. And roses can provide that. Okay, enough of that. A couple other tools that you might want to, after all your pruning is done, or as you're pruning, depending on how you want to do it. Some people prune one bush and clean out that whole bush by raking out all the junk around. You might have to take out all the old bark you have so you can eventually put down new mulch and fertilizer. Now's not the time you have to do that. But you do need to rake and clean up because tidiness is important in a rose garden. You might want to use a rake. I have all these tools, and some of them are nice and shiny because they don't get used too often. But
I have like 10 of those.
I know.
I have them everywhere.
I do too. I do too. So this gets in and underneath, and it just kind of helps in your tidiness. You can also use one of, I usually don't have so many in here at one time. I have several of these going on. A smaller rake, if you want to rake around. It's up to you. You kind of pick your tools. You certainly don't need as many as we have, but we've been acquiring them for a long time, and each year there's a new favorite. So after you've cleaned out under your bush, you're going to check for weeds. And you can do that with a little, if it's just a little one.
I use those. I use this tool for dandelions.
Oh yes, I do too.
And,
and crabgrass. And,
well, for things that are deeply rooted.
yeah.
I use them for that.
Yeah, I do too. And you can get inexpensive ones and expensive ones. So again, the ones that are really sharp are good, but I usually keep those taped up. This is another one that gets in between. Again, this is a pricier one that you don't really need, but it's nice to have in your toolbox. Okay, Aldo, can you see anything else in here I need to pull out?
No, I think we
Oh,
covered.
here's this was a favorite a couple years ago, and I kind of forgot about it. But it gets in, and you can pull back, and it gets up a whole string of weeds. Because you want to get those weeds out now, because later you might put down. Oh,
Well, my favorite tools is I have a sickle tool like this that I can get the roots out of the Bermuda grass.
oh,
And I can also dig a little bit.
yeah.
And then it cuts the roots.
Oh,
And then
good.
of course, I use something like this. It's another weeder. And then I scrape all the weeds from around the drip line of the rose.
Yeah, I think I have one of those
Yes.
too over in my other.
Anyway, so these are
Yeah.
my favorite weeding tools.
And this one looks like it needs to be cleaned a little bit. It might need a little WD-40 and a little sharpening.
I don't do any of that stuff.
Well, that's why I use this. You can make this as intense as you need to. But it's also easy to garden. It doesn't have to be hard. It's supposed to be enjoyable. So keep it enjoyable.
How do you sharpen your tools?
Okay, well, often if I can find somebody else to do it, I do that. you need a diamond file, or there's all kinds of tools that you can get that will sharpen. And then you're just going to run your file around, and then you're going to go like that to get all the extra stuff off. And it's much better to have a sharp tool, and truly the more expensive pruners that you buy, the longer they last. And they'll stay sharp for much longer, and you won't have to do this. I usually only have to have them sharpened maybe once a season, and we have 500 roses. So I know, crazy. Crazy. Compulsive and crazy.
Well,
but
that's
very
a small
enjoyable.
garden.
It is for you. and it was a step down from when we had 800. So so that's how I prune. Now, if you buy less expensive, I would say you're going to have to sharpen a little more often, and you might have to buy pruners every year. So I think it's better to invest in the beginning if this is going to be one of the things that you're out taking care of. And as I say that, these don't just cut roses. They cut any kind of plant that you happen to have. So if you garden perennials, if you garden succulents, these will also work. But we tend to think that they're just for roses. And we say that our favorite
How do you
is...
disinfect your tools?
I was just going to say, we say that our favorite brand is ARS. It doesn't have anything to do with the American Rose Society. Just to put that down. But they are wonderful pruners and tools. I use Lysol. When we had to start using a lot of sanitizer, I had to go out to my garden stuff to find my can of Lysol. Now I have it everywhere. So there's Lysol. There's also this for your hands. So you're going to keep, even though you have gloves on, occasionally you're going to have to use a Kleenex and you take your gloves off. Make sure you take care of sanitizing throughout your trips outside. Also some spray. So I think those are things that we have around very readily now. So make sure you use them, not just for the hygiene that we need to keep healthy, but also the hygiene we need to have out in the garden year-round. So if we ever get through this pandemic, these will still be good out in your garden shed. So, a couple other things that I use as I'm pruning. This has to be one of my favorite tools. This is a shovel. In the rose world, we talk about roses that aren't performing very well meeting Mr. Shovel. Well, this is my Mr. Shovel.
That's your shovel pruner?
This is my shovel pruner. We talk about digging up a rose as shovel pruning it. This one works. It works because I'm short, but I think it works for anybody. And one thing that I do is if a rose is not performing well, as much as it's hard to give it up, I'll say, Rose, this is Mr. Shovel. Either produce or you're going to meet him up close and personal later. So a rose, and I'm serious, sometimes that's effective. Sometimes they do meet Mr. Shovel later, but not always. Okay, let's see where we are. But it is one of my favorite tools, not just for the time that I want to dig up a rose, but also when I want to plant a rose. So it's important. Baldo, we were going to talk about, WD-40, you probably have some. That will help with your tools too. They will help sometimes just cleaning them. Gets some of the rust off, in case there's rust. That happens sometimes.
The rust on the tools, right?
Rust on the tools, yeah.
Not rust on the foliage.
That we want to get rid of totally. Okay, when you've pruned your rose, even if you've decided you want it to meet Mr. Shovel, right then. Sometimes you don't want to dig it up right then. You might want to use some tape to mark it because, you know, we're not all as young as we used to be. Sometimes we forget. And so if you mark your rows that this is what you want to take out, you can dig it up later, like the day before the trash is going to be picked up. Okay, so this works for climbers, but it also has other uses in the garden, and as does just rope. I like this rope to pull up my climbers, as a matter of fact. Okay, something else you might want to have available, because you are going to be planting new roses this year. I know you are. We always like to label our roses. This is one thing that we often use, this and a label maker, which I don't have out here, but so have these available. Don't forget. I know you think, oh, I'm going to remember what that rose is, but you don't sometimes. I have one over there, Baldo, I want you to identify, because I don't know what it is, and I can't find its label. You might also want to have just a pair of regular scissors, garden scissors. Because you never know when you might need to cut something.
You know, so what I do is I have labels.
Yes.
And then when I plant the rose, I put this label on the south side, of the bush. All my roses in the south side, about 5 inches from the trunk, I put this label with the name of the rose.
Now, do you use a pencil?
Yes.
And
I dig it in.
South side, so it doesn't get.
That way I can find it.
Well, and south side also because it's not going to get the west sun to bleach it out. Because
Right.
I've had that problem.
And anyways, it's
Way down
buried.
there?
It's buried in the soil. That way, my nephews or my grandkids don't come over and play
Yeah,
games with me
yeah.
by changing the labels around.
I'm not sure where that label went, because normally when I get a new rose, I'll make a label before it even gets planted. So
Anyway, I learned this by the hard way.
Yeah,
Because my kids were always changing labels.
Yeah. Also, someplace close to where you're working, if you have a work table or something, I'd always have a notepad out with something to write if you need to make a note to yourself or whatever, because you're going to think of things, and sometimes it's just a pleasant thought. Come over and write it down, because it will be gone from your memory, and it could be something that's really important and will give you some joy later, or it's going to tell you a task that you need to take care of later, but not right then. So that's just kind of extra stuff. And I would have water available, because you might get dehydrated, so take care of yourself. You might want some fruit. Just happens to be mandarins. Here. Here's something else you might want. Is
I've been using this gadget quite a bit.
I know. Well, it
Now,
works.
especially now that
You're
I'm
younger.
up in years.
I was going to say, because you're younger, I know exactly how old he is. So, yeah, this is like a kneeling pad, and Baldo has actual kneeling things that he puts down. I tend to not want to get that far down on the ground, so I use it more like this, where I can sit and prune.
I got one about a month ago
Oh,
because I injured my knee and I had problems
getting
up.
back up. So this works
So-
as a.
Anyway, then I remember that you had one, and I said, "Oh, Sue had one of those."
Well,
So I went to Amazon. I got one
oh,
for
okay.
about $35.
I have no idea. This is so old that it's been, well, you can see. Evidently, there were times that it didn't get moved in and it got wet, and so it's rusty, but it works.
Yeah, I saw you using it, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Oh, at least, at least. I've been old for a long time, Baldo. But gardening keeps me young.
Well, you know, you've been keeping this thing in the right places. You have to
Yep.
put it indoors.
Well,
But if you leave it outdoor like I do,
yes.
it doesn't last as long.
Yeah, that's true. And we have this wonderful overhang where we can keep things out year-round. We don't have to make sure they go in the cart. They're okay. And right now, often what it is when it rains, the bird feeders go here, so they're not outside, but the birds can still get to them. So, Baldo, can you think of anything else we need to do?
No, we cover all.
Did we cover it all?
Yes.
And remember to keep it simple. And that's one of my things about roses is KISS, keep it simple, sunshine. So even though you don't always have to work out in the sunshine, the garden will make you, it's like it's a sunny day in your heart.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and enjoy your pruning.
Thank
and
you
your
very
garden.
much, Sue,
You're
for
welcome.
wonderful
Oh,
demonstration.
thank you. Thank
As
you.
always.